which is about a girl who discovers that she's not human and belongs to an alternate world where the Great Chicago Fire never happened and deadly creatures called shays terrorize the human population. And it's a paranormal, urban fantasy, but it's also a bit of a Romeo and Juliet romance. Done?
Yes. Team. Hi, I'm Gennifer, Albin. That sounded really ridiculous. Hi. I wrote Cruel, and in Cruel, women known as spinsters weave the fabric of reality, and the story centers on a 16-year-old girl named Annalise, who is about to undergo her testing to see if she has this ability. And as the story opens, we learn that she has been trained by her parents her whole life to fail at this test, but we're not really sure why. But she slipped and wove a moment of time, and they're going to come for her tonight. So she's swept away to the Coventry, and she gets involved with the politics of power and the machinations of the evil guild, and she starts to unravel a very deadly secret that they want kept quiet.
Ooh.
All set?
All set?
Okay, I'm Caragh O'Brien, and I've written the Birthmarks trilogy. To talk a little bit about the third book, which is the one that's recently come out, I'm going to backtrack and tell you a little bit about the first two. The first one, Birthmark, takes place in the future after climate change, and it's about Gaia Stone, a midwife, whose job it is to take babies from their parents, well, from their mothers, and give the newborns to the authorities who live on the other side of the wall. It's a dystopian story. It has genetics in it, and a lot of adventure and some suspense, and a lot of evil, and bad things happen, very bad, evil things happen.
There's also kissing.
Yes, there's like a little bit of kissing, it's true. There's more kissing in book 2. In book 2, Gaia goes to another dystopian society where the men outnumber the women 9-1, but the women are in charge. And there is a very strict social code in that men and women are not supposed to touch, and kissing is a crime. There are other problems in this society in that they're running out of baby girls, they're not being born, and yet anybody who tries to leave the society ends up dying. So it's sort of an environmental trap. And that's where Gaia goes. What's really cool for me about the second book is that in some ways it's a reversal of the first. In the first one, she's this outsider without much power, and in the second book, she's valuable just because she's a girl when she first shows up. So she's already on the power side of the power structure. And yes, there's a love square, which is kind of different for book 2.
A love square?
There is a love square. There's a love. No, it's a square. It's a true love square, which you don't see all the time. Yeah, it was kind of fun. That's right. Yeah, my editor thought that Gaia should end up with a different guy, but you know, I didn't agree with her, so I just kept writing it the way I was supposed to write it. And then finally, in the third book, Gaia returns to the setting of the first book, but now she's bringing 2,000 refugees back with her. And they need water, and the people inside the wall have become even more cruel. They're experimenting on mothers from outside the wall. And it's pretty much a train wreck happening. You can see it coming, and you keep hoping things will get better, but it's really just awful. It's just awful. And that's what I've been writing and working on for all these years.
Hi, I'm Leigh Bardugo. I wrote Shadow and Bone. Okay, so in fantasy, darkness is usually a metaphor, right? Like darkness falls across the land, a dark age is coming, terrible things are going to happen. And I wanted to ask the question, what if darkness was a place? What if all the things that you imagine lurking in the dark were real, and they were worse than you ever imagined, and you had to fight them on their own territory? So in this book, this country, this nation of Ravka, has been essentially torn in two by this swath of nearly impenetrable darkness, crawling with monsters that feast on human flesh. And in order for them to trade with the outside world, in order for them to get finished goods and ammunition to fight the wars that are raging on their borders, they have to cross this dark territory at tremendous cost of human life. And into this fold goes my heroine, Alina Starkov, and her best friend, Mal. And Alina is basically cannon fodder. I mean, she's a map maker in this army, but she's not a very good one. She's an orphan who was raised in the home of a duke, along with her friend Mal. And since they've joined the army, Alina has been disappearing into the background as Mal's star rises. And all that changes when the regiment enters the fold and they're attacked by a flock of these monsters. And Alina reveals the power that not even she knew she had that could be the secret to setting this country free. And she's whisked away to the capital, where she enters the ranks of the Grisha, a magical elite who protect Ravka. And she meets the Darkling, who is the most powerful of them all, and easy on the eyes, and has secrets of his own. And that's the story of Shadow and Bone.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write your book, now that we know what they're about?
Sure. Should we get on the line and bounce around?
However you want to do it.
Go. I'll start. The first line of this book is, knowing what I know now, I'd say my foster mother had her reasons for throwing a kitchen knife at me. And this, and the book as a whole, was inspired by a real-life story. A friend of mine told me about how when he was in high school, he got into this fierce argument with his mother. She threw a knife at him, and it missed him. It hit the fish tank and broke it. And she swears that she didn't actually throw it at him, that she was just gesticulating wildly in the heat of their argument, and the knife slipped. And he begs to differ. But it's a story that stayed with me for a few years, because I've always wondered, well, did she mean to throw it? Why didn't it hit him? And so I knew that I wanted to write about that particular scene, and it occurred to me that could I write a novel where what if the reason that the knife did not hit the intended target, what if that reason were a paranormal one? What if it were an otherworldly one? And thus came the Shades. The Shades are a new paranormal creature, and my protagonist, this is a bit of a spoiler, but you can figure it out anyway, I think, from reading the copy. She is one of them, and Shades can become incorporeal, which means not just that they become invisible, but that they physically disappear. They have no body. And in the alternate Chicago, Shades and humans are at war, and my main character, Darcy, becomes caught between these two people, between the Shades, of which she is technically one, and humans, which she's been raised to be.
Or bouncing, why not? Because otherwise they have to be,
Yeah, I know.
just so that's it visually more interesting. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, so I already told you that part of the inspiration for Shadow and Bone, and I think there were a couple of other questions in my head. One was, what happens when you bring a gun to a magic fight? If you are in a traditional sort of sword and sorcery fantasy, then, you have a broadsword and you meet a wizard and the wizard kicks your butt. But if you have a repeating rifle, that might go a little bit differently. So whereas a lot of fantasy is set in a world inspired by medieval England or medieval Europe, my world is inspired by Tsarist Russia of the early 1800s. And it's a world where the magic is very strictly bound by rules, which was another thing. Sure, you can have guns, but then you need the magic to be constrained by rules, or then magic's still going to win out. So the magic in my world is called the small science. It's never actually called magic in the book. And it's the manipulation of matter at its most fundamental levels. And it's basically a magical version of molecular chemistry. And this country, as I mentioned, is being left behind. So this is an age where magic is finally coming up against technology. And that was one of the things that drove me. And I guess part of it was, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, but I always kind of wondered what happens when you wave the wand or you say the curse or whatever it is, what's actually physically happening. So yeah.
I got the idea for Birthmark when I was driving through Memphis, actually. Well, kind of, yeah. I was driving through Memphis and other states in the South in January 2008, and if you lived in Memphis at that time, you might recall that there was a drought. There was a drought through most of the southern states. And the first time that we drove in our red minivan over a bridge and there was no water in the lake below, I was very concerned. And then we went over another bridge and again there was no water in the lake. Did you remember that? Do you remember how incredibly dry it was? And I started thinking, this is really happening to us now. And what is going to happen to our country when we have to deal with climate change widespread all around? And I figured we would move to Canada because it wouldn't be quite so hot there and dry there, and they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. We'd just sort of take over Canada. What could they do? They're so nice up there. It wasn't really the nicest idea, but it did make me think about what's going to happen socially and politically when we really run out of resources and have problems. And that's sort of just what generally got me thinking about the social structure that would play out in my novel. But what really got me going is I started writing the first scene, where Gaia delivers the baby, and by the end of the first chapter, she's given the baby away to the authorities, and I thought, what kind of society would create a person who could do something that I think is so egregious? And I had to write more of the book to find out what was going to happen and why Gaia had become the way she was. So it was really the drive through the southern states that gave me the earliest ideas. So thank you, Memphis. Or Oxford, I'm sorry. That's awful.
We're staying in Memphis. We drove all the way from
that you were
Memphis to
thinking
Oxford.
Memphis from a distance.
I was
And
thinking Memphis from a
we've
distance.
flown
We don't
every
go to
day
Oxford.
this week, so we're all like, what day is it?
And nobody
What is
kicked me
today?
up here.
Not sure. There's an amazing painting, and I really should bring the painting. I haven't brought this.
Maybe we can put it on
Can
our
we make
iPad.
this happen?
On our iPad, we can put it on there.
In the future, if you want to follow us to Philadelphia, we'll have it on the iPad. There's an amazing painting that's referenced in a book I studied in college and then in grad school, called El Bordando el Manto Terrestre, which is me murdering the Spanish language. But it's by a Spanish surrealist named Remedios Varo, and it's this picture of girls, and they're sitting in a tower, and they're all embroidering, and someone's watching over them. And from the tower windows, the cloth they're embroidering is flowing out and covering the world. So they're creating the world. And I've been obsessed with this since the moment I saw it. If you look at the painting, one of the girls' eyes is averted, and she's kind of looking at you. And she's different than all of them. She looks exactly the same as the rest of them, but she's somehow different. She's self-aware. And I was thinking of this painting one day, and I sat down and I wrote a prologue about this girl knowing that she was about to be taken off to the tower to make the world for the rest of her life. And I had to figure out, who is this girl, and why is she in the tower, and how did she get there, and how does she feel about this? And because she was so unique to the rest of them. So when I was going about writing it, the painting is actually very fantastical. It's a surrealist painting. But what I decided to do was to take it a whole different direction. Instead of making it kind of rustic and fantastical, I made it very sleek and futuristic, where you have a marriage of almost Mad Men meeting The Matrix. So it's sci-fi and film noir and smoke and mirrors, and it was a lot of fun to write, but it all started from writing a story for that painting.
Does anyone have a question they want to ask before we open it up? Yes.
You said with your book, Ms. Leigh, you said you based it off of Tsarist Russia. What made you choose that basis? Was it just because of how it was?
Well,
So you wanted to rewrite it or kind of shed a different light on it?
it was a few things, honestly. I mean, part of it was I wanted to do something different. I mean, I'm a huge fantasy fan, but I wanted to take readers someplace else. And the other thing was, when I wrote the first draft, there's sort of two kinds of world building to me. There's, the structure of the world that gives the reader the sense of order and power. That was in place. The magical systems weren't in place. What the Grisha could do, what Alina could do, what the Darkling could do. But the other kind of world building to me is the sense of place for the reader, and that really wasn't there at all. And it wasn't, and when I was getting into that draft, I went to a used bookstore and I was walking around and I went to the travel section and I found this Russian Imperial Atlas from it sounds much more like, you know, I always say that it's like, you know, you picture me going and taking out this red leather book and, you know, blowing the dust off the cover, but really it was like a textbook from 1982 or something. And it had this picture on the cover of these two men in fur hats standing in the snow in front of a sledge, and I started flipping through, and there were military campaigns and trade routes, and all of a sudden I was like, of course, this is the world. This is the world. Because there were already these power dynamics in the story. This huge division in wealth between the rich and the poor. This army of conscripts, of serfs, though I wasn't calling them serfs at the time. And this failure to industrialize, you know, this country that's getting left behind. So it was, I knew right away that it was the right fit. And I think also, like, when I was a kid, Anastasia was like, everybody read that story. Like, everybody knew that story. And that's still true. And I think it's because, even if you don't know anything about Russian history, you still have these images in your head of incredible beauty and decadence and wealth, and also horrible brutality. You know, it's the Winter Palace on one side and the Gulag on the other. So I felt like that would resonate with readers the way it resonated for me.
Does anyone else want to ask a question? We have special prizes for you and the next person.
I do have a question. When does the second book come out for Shadow and Bone?
It comes out June 4th, 2013, and I can tell you that before then there probably will be another. There's already a short story on Tor.com. Actually, all of us have short stories on Tor.com now, and we will be doing some bonus content for the paperback edition of Shadow and Bone as well.
That's fun.
Yeah, and I think would you know when your whole trilogy is out already?
Yep.
Your last one.
Done.
When is your book two
Done.
coming out though?
Are these also trilogies? Are your two
My,
also
mine will,
trilogies?
yeah,
Ours
yeah. My next one will probably come out October or November next year. 'Cause this one just came out on Tuesday. So you'll have to wait a while.
Mine is a standalone.
Okay,
This is it. I do have a new trilogy that I'm working on, and the first of that comes out either next fall or maybe in the early winter of 2014. And that's called The Winter's Curse.
Anyone else?
Why writing?
I
What
write-
made each of you individually choose this?
Are you a writer?
No, I'm not.
How many of you here today are writers? How many of you love to read?
I hate to read.
Like, I don't put my hand up for that question.
It does go together sometimes. I just have always loved writing. I was forced to keep a journal in 7th grade by Mr. Sanborn. And I found I kept doing it even after the assignment was over. And I started writing stories and novels. And I just, it's something that I always wanted to do. Writing and thinking became the same thing. If there was something important that I was trying to figure out, I would have to write about it to understand it. And then it was a way of seeing the world and having the world feel rich to me. So I kind of kept doing it, and I thought I would quit at times. Like, I went off to become a teacher, and I've raised a family and everything. But whenever I had a vacation or time to do anything else, I was always going back to my writing. So I think it's just something that really makes me happy.
So I wonder, did you all watch the Olympics, particularly the gymnastics? No, none of you watched it.
Yeah, we did.
Most of you watched it. Some of you did, right?
Yeah.
Or at least you've seen gymnastics in action. It's really amazing. I mean, those girls can fly. Well, the guys can too, but I always watch the girls' gymnastics. And it's so incredible to see what they can do. And I remember watching that when I was a little girl and thinking, oh, I wish I could fly through the air like that. And be so acrobatic. And I think it's like that with writing too. And from a very early age, I loved reading so much that I wanted to be able, and in the process of reading, unlike I think watching gymnastics, you can actually feel the movements, or you can live a little the story that you're reading. And I wanted to be able to recreate that.
talked about, even though I already took a turn? Because I've always been really impressed with the gymnasts too. But I've sort of been believed that gymnastics and writing are not the same, because with gymnastics you practice and practice and practice, and you have 4 minutes for one time in your life when it has to be perfect. But writing, you can keep working on the same thing for a year.
Yeah.
And polishing and tinkering and polishing and tinkering, and to me that's
That's a good point.
it's a very different thing. But yeah.
I have this perpetual thing where I'm like walking down the street and I see the headline to a newspaper, or I overhear a snippet of conversation, or I'm watching a movie and like it's a what if? What if such and such? Like there was this horrible story on the news about a little girl who was abducted, and this was not one of the recent ones, it was a while back, and I thought, what if someone was coming to take them to save the world? And that's a story I'd love to write. But it's just little things like that that pop into my head all the time, and then the wheels start turning, and they keep turning, and then suddenly characters show up and start talking. So it sounds like I'm schizophrenic. But Norman Mailer actually calls it the spooky art, and I love that term because it's kind of like that. These people appear in your head, and they're so very real, and you just give them worlds to live in, and give them things to do, and you get to know them. It's remarkable. My voicemail actually says, I'm sorry, I'm busy creating new worlds right now, and people laugh and make fun of me for that. But it's true. That's what I'm doing during the day. I get to make worlds. That is awesome.
I was an only child, so I talked to myself constantly. I actually still talk to myself constantly, but now I wear Bluetooth, so people don't know I'm nuts. I would make up stories all the time. But I think things changed for me a lot when I hit junior high. Junior high was really rough on me. I was not doing well at home, not doing well at school, and that was kind of all there was other than the mall. And it's when I started reading science fiction and fantasy, and it's when I started writing it too, because I think it was this way of being able to architect worlds where, I always say this about sci-fi and fantasy, that I read a lot of literary fiction as well, and the great thing about sci-fi and fantasy is it actually teaches you sort of practical lessons. Like, I loved Catcher in the Rye, but Holden Caulfield didn't really teach me anything other than I wasn't alone and how to mope. Dune taught me, politics and intrigue and to be prepared and to be a badass, it taught me to be ready to fight, yeah. Not that I'm gonna, hurl a knife at anybody at any point, but still, there was something practical about these worlds where you had to be brave and strong and ready. And in these worlds, I could also turn myself into whoever I wanted to be. And it was kind of a survival mechanism for me. So, and I think it sort of still is.
Thank you all. Does anyone have any last questions before we start signing?
I know a lot of writers use some of their characters to pay homage to people that have helped them throughout their lives. But are there any characters that y'all have done in the books that you painted in a poor light to get back at people that might have wronged y'all?
That's a legal question that we can't answer. I haven't yet. That's a great idea.
I can tell you there's a description of a girl who used to pick on me in 8th grade. It's like 2 sentences, but I got a petty amount of satisfaction. And I have this fantasy of her picking up the book and being like, oh, that girl is me. And I would say Bagra was also sort of like this teacher / mentor, but she is mean, and she was based on a really mean ballet teacher that I used to have. But that wasn't so much like a get back as.
Well, not get back. Just so they can see that they might have done you wrong. It's like just kind of show them look what you've done with your life. I'm a successful writer, and I have all this.
I think Leigh would be like, yeah, Shadow and Bone, Leigh Bardugo, New York Times bestselling author.
Thank you, Gennifer. At least for me, like when I was writing this book, you're not, at least, I am full of self-doubt. So it's not like when I was writing the book, I was like, I am going to be so successful. I was like, maybe I'll finish it. That would be awesome. And then maybe someday somebody will want to read it, and then maybe somebody will want to publish it. So even the idea of like using it as a tool of vengeance was totally beyond me. But I like the way you think,
Yeah.
and I'm going to think about that for book 3. Everything else.
See what happens. Success has turned you into it.
It didn't turn me. It just gave me a venue.
Just gave you
Yeah.
an idea.
To be vengeful.
That's right.
No, unfortunately, no.
It's a great idea.
It is a great idea.
I'm
I
sure
think
it's been
I
done.
think like you, I was riddled with self-doubt. It was finishing and maybe someone reading.
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah.
She's got one.
What do you guys do when you get into like a writer's block?
Stephen Pressfield has a great book called The War of Art, and I actually, it jumps around a little too much for me, but one of the points he makes is that writer's block is really just resistance. You're resisting something in your story. You're either not going in the right direction, or you need to maybe skip ahead, or you need to take a break and work on something else, and that you should recognize writer's block for what it really is. And sometimes it's as simple for me as like I stop writing and I go out and do something because I've been staring at the page too long. And sometimes it's as simple as pushing through because I'm just being a poop head who doesn't want to work. It's true. Well, I was choosing my language. Carefully.
Wise.
The poop head language. No one can object to that. Just you, Raven.
So,
Sorry, go ahead.
so my main character, Darcy, was abandoned outside of a Chicago firehouse when she was 5 years old and doesn't remember what happened before then, why she was dropped off there, who she was before. And part of the book is the process of her trying to remember who she is and coming to understand who she is. And I did have a block right before I wrote her memory, right when she gets her memory back and she knows who she is and what happened to her and why she's forgotten everything before that. And I had a really hard time writing that chapter. And I went running, actually, and I listened to Regina Spektor's Blue Lips. I don't know if you know Regina Spektor at all, but the song the lyrics are something like, blue lips, blue veins, blue the color of our planet from far, far away. And then she says, blue is the most human color. And they were words that resonated with me because even though there are these two species at war with each other, shades and humans, they're not so different fundamentally. And the song is really about how, we all have the same kind of blood in us. At least that's what I take away from that song. And there was something about listening to that unlocked what I wanted to depict in that chapter. The message, I guess, or the theme that I wanted to drive home. And also, too, it made me think, maybe because I was listening to a song, and a song is just a short piece that lasts for a few minutes, I realized that this chapter, this memory, is a little bit like a short story. What I have to do here is tell the short story of who she was as a child and how she got to where she is now. And it was just, I think, being able to rethink where I was and how I was going to move forward that really helped.
I like to change POVs, like I'll change point of view, which is what happened with this book. It was originally all going to be in the third person, and then I switched over to Alina's POV, and I really liked it. Or I will jump ahead to something else. Like if I realize I'm sitting there and I'm banging my head against the wall and looking at the same two sentences for however long, and you almost don't realize you're doing it, or at least I don't. Then I'll just, write something like, make this make sense, and then move on to the next thing. And to me, it's really about momentum and not letting a bad writing day turn into a bad writing week or worse. And even, like sometimes I will have characters have conversations that I know are not going to make it into the book, but because they need to articulate what they need to me or what they want to me. Or I'll go do something else, but I will not, that something else is never get on Facebook or go watch you know, reruns of So You Think You Can Dance on YouTube. Like, it has to be something that's actually like active or useful or functional, so that, you know, so that that part of my brain is turning off, but another part of the brain is working.
I'd say momentum's really important to me too. I have a very hard time with first drafts, and if I have to stop for any reason, if I have to stop for a few days and then try to start up again, it's really, really hard for me. And I have to give myself permission to write stuff that's dog rot. And I know it's going to probably take me about 3 days of writing really awful stuff before it even begins to start to feel sort of natural and start moving again. And that's really painful for me to do it, but I have learned about myself that if I keep forcing myself, then I'll get to the stuff that flows a little bit better. And then I can fix it later or cut it if I have to when I'm revising. It's really hard for me to start when I'm dead in the water. Like I had hoped I would write some while I'm on tour this week, and it's just there's just no way. So when I get back next week and I'm supposed to write again, it's gonna be really hard, and I'll just have to write for 3 days terribly. It'll be awful.
Yay!
But worth it.
Well, I have to get there to get to the stuff I like. I have to do it. It's terrible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you guys.